If liberty means anything at all, it means the right to tell people what they do not want to hear. Good evening and welcome. This is Face the Nation. The topic of discussion today is the freedom of expression. Joining us this evening on the show are Manjula Gajanayaka, Executive Director, Institute of Democratic Reforms and Electoral Studies, Dr. Sujata Gamage, Advisor, Advocata Institute, Dr. Jehan Pereira, Executive Director, National Peace Council of Sri Lanka, as well as Swastika Arulingam, President, Commercial and Industrial Workers Union. Thank you very much, gentlemen and the ladies, for joining us this evening on Face the Nation. Joining us tonight to pose questions from our panelists. On to my immediate right is Chanaya Dandigama. On to my immediate left is Attorney at Law Sharon Benedict. And on to my far left is Nadim Majid, joining us after some time. And if you have questions, you can direct those questions to 071 558 7788, and we would love to take these questions to the panelists and get their views heard with regard to the topic that we're talking about, the freedom of expression. So let's start off tonight's show with Manjula Gajanayaka, Executive Director of the Institute of Democratic Reforms and Electoral Studies, on the topic freedom of expression. Your time starts now, Manjula.
Yeah, actually, we are living in a republic. We are living under the second Republican Constitution of Sri Lanka. Due to that, actually, that the sovereignty powers vested with the people. Then, since I'm an election observer, I would like to talk on the elections, because it is very directly relevant to the subject today, freedom of expression, because this is the election time. Then I would like to talk more on that topic. Then actually, when considering the current situation, it seems that actually that everyone be aware that the reason that the freedom of expression, actually that it is related to the casting votes, and the rights of voting also. Then there's a very famous verdict given in 1999 by the Supreme Court, actually given under the three-bench Supreme Court, that Mark Fernando emphasized the importance of the voting rights, and it is the integral part of the freedom of expression. Then I would like to talk on more about that. Then, considering the current situation, what we are seeing, according to the 1948 Universal Declaration of Human Rights, actually, that the specific document highlights main two things. The first thing is actually the genuine elections. The second thing is that periodic elections. We should have, since we are living in a Republican Constitution, under the Republican Constitution, actually we should have first genuine election. Second thing is actually the periodic elections. But unfortunately, in last 10 or 15 years, we can't see such a situation here, because it is just like, let me to say like this, actually, that in Sri Lanka, like, we are entering into the Bermuda Triangle in sometimes, because that some political parties, basically in current situation, United National Party, actually, when they are taking power in current situation, actually what is happening here, but they are a bit reluctant to hold the elections. Then other thing is actually that the very first time in electoral history, we are seeing that the President has called all the election commission members to the president office twice. I mean that as an executive president, he can do it, but actually we seen that we are experiencing that situation in the very first time of history after, I mean, the organizing electioneering and also advising, the talking, discussing with the election commission. It is okay as an election executive president. But it seems that he has given multiple questions to him, as well as many questions, as well as actually the influence of Attorney General. It is very questionable. We can talk more about that. But in current situation, it seems that few political parties are obstructing to hold elections, as well as other majority of political parties, more than 50 political parties, are trying to hold the election. This is the debate in Sri Lanka. Anyway, in this situation, actually, I can say that the freedom of expression is narrowing that through the postponing the elections.
Thank you very much, Manjula Gajanayaka. Executive Director of the Institute of Democratic Reforms and Electoral Studies. We, of course, will pose questions to you, Manjula, when the show goes on with regard to the campaign financing bill that the government intends to bring forth this week to Parliament as well. We'll talk a little bit about that as well when the show goes along, but I want to now focus my attention on Dr. Sujata Gamage, advisor of the Advocata Institute.
Yes, I too my take on freedom of expression is about the right of vote. The right to vote is not a fundamental right listed in the Constitution, but it is part of the franchise, the right to free and fair elections. And more importantly, in a recent decision, when the local elections were indefinitely postponed, the local elections were due in 2015, and they were not happening. There were various technical reasons the government was delaying those, and there was a fundamental rights case filed in the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court accepted there's a fundamental right to the people, and they directed the government to hold the elections immediately, the local elections. And the government really had to get its act together, and that's how we got the 2018 local government election happening in March. So it is indeed, right to vote is a fundamental right to the people. The courts have accepted that. And but the thing is, it's a different kind of right, because it's not an individual right. I can't exercise it by myself. The country has to hold election. The government has to hold the election. When it comes to that, you can always get technical issues. Legally, we are required to have the local election by within 6 months before the end of the local period of the local councils. So the local council's term expired in 21, and the minister has the power to extend it. No reasons given. He just expanded to 2021, 2022 March. And now it's really, we must have the local councils in place by March 19th. So the election has to happen now. So legally, yes, we are, legally there's nothing we can do. It has to happen. But technical issues can always come in the way. The glaring example is the provincial councils. The provincial councils have been, Manju was saying that the last one, one is overdue by 4 years and 3 months or something. And why are they held up? Because the government changed the act, and the act required delimitation, and the delimitation was presented to the parliament, and it was supposed to be, it had to be approved by the parliament, and it never came out of the parliament. It went into oblivion. When the parliament dissolved in 2019, then it's just in there, we call it a Gandhamba situation, it's neither here nor there. But the funny thing is, I don't know, I'd like to ask Manju about that. What were you guys doing? I mean, we were busy with other things, right?
You can pose that question to Manju later on, but not right now.
What I'm saying is, yes, it's a fundamental right to vote, but it's a different right because it's in a way collective right. And there are technical issues can get in the way.
Doctor, very quickly, this election that is happening momentarily, if things work out as panned out to be, is this a requirement from the people's perspective, or is it a requirement from the politicians' perspective?
It doesn't matter.
Because they take this into account as far as a national election is concerned.
No, the first thing is it's a rule of law. We have to go by the rule of law. So, I mean, it doesn't matter whether people want it or not. It's a rule of law.
Right.
We have to. So, I think, but then the will of Parliament, the politicians can say gauge the will of the people, and we can have a political causes. It's legally, we are legally bound, but we can have technical causes and we can have political. I can talk about those.
We'll talk about that momentarily, Dr. Sujata, but big questions with regard to whether we need an election right now when the country is going through a dire economic condition. We'll talk about all that and more momentarily. I now move my attention to Dr. Jehan Pereira, Executive Director of the National Peace Council of Sri Lanka.
Well, thank you. First of all, thank you, Shamir, for inviting me to this important discussion.
Pleasure to have you on board, Dr. Jehan, as always.
It's at a very crucial time also because the country is in a very bad situation and people are looking for change. They want solutions to the problems, and we are going to be discussing that. I see both positive and negatives in the current situation with regard to freedom of expression. In my own professional and public life, I write to the media, I follow the media, and I'm also a part of civil society, active NGO, working for peace. In that area, I see positive things. When I write my columns now, when I express my opinion, I can do so without feeling intimidated, as I used to feel. I don't feel that same sense of threat to myself or to my organization. I think that's a positive thing. I also see in the newspaper, the editorials, very strong criticism of the government, extremely strong criticism of politicians in general, for good reasons. So that sense of freedom to express in the media, I think, has improved at this time. That is my personal view. And also with regard to the work I do, unpopular work in general, it's talking about the relations between the ethnic communities, how to share power in this country, who is the major, who owns this country, that type of issue. I find that there's a lot of receptivity to what we say at all levels of society, government officials, religious clergy, civil society. So that freedom is there, and we are not hindered in our work. The negatives are also very significant, and one is, which we have already discussed, the elections. Elections they come out of democracy. Democracy is about having elections regularly and the people being able to express their will, express themselves through the electoral process, and that there is some threat to that, I see. Because we are still not sure, even after the election commission has declared elections, called for nominations, there is still speculation whether at the last moment the government will not pull some rabbit out of the hat and stop the elections. That doubt is there, that mistrust of the government is there. That is a major problem, a worry, because I think elections are important. They are a matter of democracy.
Right. Dr. Jehan, very quickly before I move to Swastika, you said today, at this point of time, you feel a sense of freedom when you write your articles, when you write something on the paper or whatever it is. Now you sense a little bit of freedom. Am I right? With
security.
That? Security.
Yeah.
But if you look at what has happened in the last few weeks, President Ranil Wickremesinghe has said that he wants to bring in a law to regulate social media along the lines of the law in Singapore. Do we need such a law? If you're saying that security is there, you're saying that we can write whatever you want, we can do whatever we want, we can express our thoughts whenever we want, however we want. Why regulate social media?
Yeah, so I was going to say the last negative point, which is a very serious one, and I'm sure Swastika will be able to talk a lot about it because she's quite a heroine where the protest movement is concerned. And I'm referring to the suppression of the protest movement. It is absolutely unacceptable what is happening. The way in which those who protested, who gave us leadership at one time, are being kept incarcerated. And case against case is being filed against them. It's a disgrace. I don't know how our legal system is permitting this. It's absolutely unacceptable, and that's one of the greatest drawbacks. It is polarizing our society, and I wish that our government leadership had given an amnesty to those who fought for change of government, which brought this government to power.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Jehan Pereira, Executive Director of the National Peace Council of Sri Lanka. They say memory is short-lived as far as Sri Lankans are concerned. and that ceases to exist every single time we talk about subjects. I now move attention to Swastika Arulingam, President of the Commercial and Industrial Workers Union.
I think just before me, Dr. Jehan spoke about the Aragalia movement and how protesters have been detained, cases after cases, false or illegal cases filed against them and so on. So I think that brings us to the question of freedom of expression, but freedom for who? Because there is a concept in human rights language where we are taught that human rights are inherent and it's inalienable and it can't be taken away from us. But I want to challenge that, because freedom of expression, like any other right, the right not to be tortured, freedom of thought, conscience, it doesn't exist in a vacuum. It exists in a power dynamics. To give a very specific example, now I am a Tamil woman, and for one moment, despite the fact that I have the right of expression under the freedom of speech under the Constitution, I would not for one moment critique a Buddhist monk. Despite whatever might have happened, I will not dare come on public and do it. Why? Because I will be, I have a real fear, a well-founded fear that I will be caught under the International Covenant for Civil and Political Rights Act. It's called the ICCPR Act. Ironical that is what government uses to detain people who make unpopular opinions. But at the same time, a Buddhist monk can go to the public, make very inflammatory speeches against another community, cause an entire riot, and goes completely scot-free without having any legal implications on him. So then we come back to the original question, freedom for who? Because freedom of expression, despite the fact that we are told and taught that human rights are inherent and inalienable, all rights exist in tension with power relations in society, whether it be class, whether it be gender, whether it be caste, whether it be race, it exists in a power relations. And who gets that right to freedom of expression depends on who is in power. To give another example, the detention of Vasanta Mudalige. Now we all stood on Golf-Face, we all asked Kota to go home, and Kota did go home. And many of us did get, not me, but many Aragalia people did get detained and arrested under various acts and laws. But no one was called a terrorist. So why was Vasanta Mudalige called a terrorist? Why is he to date a terrorist suspect? Is it because so many students protested, middle class students protested, but only Vasanta Mudalige was targeted? Is it because he is from not from a particular privileged class in society? So I want to pose that question about rights and about in general, but also about freedom of expression, as to who gets to speak, who gets to express his or her opinion, and who gets caught under the law when that opinion does not suit the status quo. So I want to leave it with that.
Swastika, very quickly, now you spoke about the ICCPR, and we all know that the ICCPR is supposed to protect civil and political rights wherever it is, and however it has been used in Sri Lanka to curtail freedom of expression, as you mentioned before. Why is that?
The ICCPR Act was brought into Sri Lanka on the basis that we as a country have signed the International Covenant for Civil and Political Rights. So we owe a duty to pass it into legislation in Sri Lanka, because we are called the dualist nation, where we have to pass a convention for it to become law in this country. Unfortunately, despite the fact that this ICCPR Act was passed, the section which is most used in the ICCPR by the government is this section 3 of the ICCPR Act, which basically says that anyone causes, acts in a way or says something in a way which causes communal disharmony or incites war or something to that effect, then that person is committing an offense. So technically, if that section is used properly, then it should be used against people who are actually causing communal disharmony or inciting violence or whatever. But what we have seen in the past is government using the ICCPR section 3 to crush opinions or to use it for a particular purpose. For instance, Ramzi Razik was arrested under the ICCPR section 3 for putting a Facebook comment. Today, for instance, there was a debate going on about the Bureau of Rehabilitation bill, and one of the members of the government said that Facebook commentators also have to be rehabilitated. So anyone who is considered as having an opposing view to the status quo is taken under this legislation and used by the government.
Thank you very much, Swastika Arulingam, President of the Commercial and Industrial Workers Union. I open the floor for questions from our journalists. On to my immediate right again, as I said before, is Shania. On to my immediate left is Attorney at Law Shalan. Far left is Nadeem. Because of the fact that Nadeem is joining us after some time, I want to start off with Nadeem today.
Thanks, Shamir. Good to be back. Dr. Jayan, I'd like to start with you and actually pick on that thread that Swastika highlighted. Because you mentioned that you feel freer, that you do not feel the same level of intimidation, but you are writing predominantly in the English language. So you might not, because for example, you look at PTA cases that were brought against Anaf Jazim. Before that, Dilshan Mohammed under ICCPR, I believe, Ramzi Razik you mentioned. Like you won't expect that kind of action by the state against, for example, Srilankanbeauty, who wrote The 7 Moons of Malayamita, where he's dealing with some pretty heavy stuff relating to Sri Lanka as well. If that book were in Sinhala or in Tamil, you might expect that it would have ruffled a few feathers. Do you accept that you are writing from a point of privilege?
Yes, I certainly agree with what you're saying. Actually, when I think about it, probably the difference between the people who are not targeted and those who are targeted, one is privilege. The other is perhaps that the government doesn't feel that we are threatening their hold on power. We are not part of a political movement that wants to remove them. Whereas they use it against those who threaten their power, their staying, which is, I mean, governments are there, politicians are there to stay in power, sometimes at all costs. But of course, there is the rule of law, which was mentioned earlier, and the rule of law should be equal to all. And yes.
So, Dr. Gehan, when you were speaking about positives, and you were highlighting a positive aspect, saying that you feel more free, you feel more secure, do you acknowledge the fact that it's not the same across the board?
Of course I do, yes. That's why I always say,
so is it really a positive then?
It is a positive. Well, there is also, I do see in the media very critical, the mainstream media, very critical commentary on what's happening today, on the government, editorial commentary. But perhaps that too is not with the intent of changing government. So where the government feels threatened that their hold on power is going to be eroded, then they will crack down.
So, but Dr. Gehan, don't you think that you're not really looking at the big picture here? Because like Shamir said, I think at the beginning, there are plans to bring in an act to control, social media and other media organizations in line with Singapore's law. Then very recently, one network that has been very critical about the government, along with many other, uttering the sentiments among the general public, there was a committee established in Parliament to look into the content of their reporting. So, isn't this just not really a positive at all, Dr. Gehan?
Yeah, all this can be used. No, it can be used very repressively, and it's used repressively against those in the protest movement, primarily against those in the protest movement at this time.
Dr. Jain,
those who threaten a hold on power.
Because you've been on this show a couple of times. You come on this show, spoke about human rights, freedom of expression, the Universal Periodic Review, so on and so forth. And you've always been an optimist. I dub you as the eternal optimist in Sri Lanka. But today, when you're talking about the negatives as far as this government is concerned, that optimism has just faded away. Why?
Well, we have to see the
not optimistic
reality
anymore.
No, there is also optimism.
You talked about the positives first.
I'm optimistic about. I'm hopeful about the possibility of, say, a solution to the ethnic conflict, which our president is promising. Of course, it's verbal promise, but it comes from a man who has not shown racism and ethnic bias in the way most of our other leaders have shown. In fact, he spoke complimentarily of our first Prime Minister, D.S. Senanayake. When he went to Jaffna, our president spoke about D.S. Senanayake and said, we should create a united people, a national identity as D.S. Senanayake wanted. And the thought went through my head. No, D.S. Senanayake, one of the first things he did was to exclude a very significant part of our people from citizenship, the Tamils of Indian origin. That was one of the first things that were done. And it was that action that then created within the other minorities the fear of what the majority would do. It created the division.
But don't you think,
Swastika.
Dr. Jain, don't you think President Ranil Wickremesinghe now, Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe in 2016 should have brought these amendments? Because in 2015, I remember Manjula saying, this is the time that change can happen in Sri Lanka, so on and so forth. A lot of sentiments were expressed. Now you are saying that this president may do what he failed to do in 2016. How can you be optimistic about something
because
of this
now
sort?
he is president, and the president is very, very powerful in our system. In the last
President without authority.
But Dr. Jain, I'd point out to you that the CCPR Act was passed under the was introduced by the Yahapalanya government by the Wickremesinghe Sirisena government.
Yes. So
And it is a good act. It's just it's been used. Just this one section is used.
Yeah,
Misused.
So anyway, basically about the ethnic issue, I think the president has an opportunity, the country has an opportunity to resolve this problem, which has been unresolved for 75 years. I'm hopeful that he will do it. I don't know. I mean, the track record is not good.
He's been in Parliament for nearly 49 years, Dr. Jain. Have you forgotten that? 49 years. Out of that 75 years, minus 26 years, 49 years in Parliament.
That's true, but he's been one among many. Now he is one, he's the supreme person. So, of course, if he's going to think about winning future elections and all, maybe he will not do it again. He'll pull back at
So you're saying he's going to contest elections again?
Yeah, that's what people say.
On the subject of the elections,
I just have a question. Sorry. So I think you focused on you mentioned that your work also covers inter-ethnic tensions, and do you agree with the statement made that in the midst of all this social and economic upheaval that inter-ethnic tensions have been better? And your work in the North and East, do you see an improvement in freedom of expression in those communities there? Because I feel like this discussion is mainly focused on a Colombo spectrum. Can we get your opinion on that?
Well, recently, when the president visited Jaffna, students protested against Mr. Wickremesinghe's coming there. I think it was also kind of solidarity with, and it was good. It was a good moment where students in Jaffna did show solidarity with students in the south, and it was responded by the government with water cannons and police. Of course, in the north, people are very used to the military coming in and breaking protests and so on. So it was not a big deal for them. In the south, it's kind of a new experience after the 80s, but in the north, it's not anything new. So that is telling of when we speak of ethnic divides and ethnic relations, we often speak of words. People say very nice things. You come to Parliament, there is a budget debate. You want the votes of the Tamil National Alliance, so you say very nice things, and then you say we are going to bring an ethnic solution, but you are entirely backed up by a party which is headed by the Rajapaksas, which in every single elections Tamils have voted against because of the way they ended the war. So it's very nice when the executive president with all his powers comes and says that he's going to bring an ethnic solution. And unfortunately, because the southern political parties, including the left political parties, do not take up the ethnic issues seriously, the minorities also, not only the Tamils but also the Muslims, do get taken up when a person comes and says we need to find a solution to the ethnic issue, unfortunately. But when we see the history of Ranil Wickremesinghe, the fact that in Parliament, his party did burn one of the most progressive constitutions in our history. When we see his history, when we see what he does when he comes to power, I don't believe that he is the person to bring a solution.
With your
to this.
permission, why don't you pose that question to Dr. Jehan? Dr. Jehan, very important point.
You were there in the constitutional making
Yeah.
process during that time. I was, I believe, still in school. So,
Oh, Dr. Jehan, what do you have to say about that?
Swastika's point basically
I
highlights that the president is in his 49-year political career, what he's established is that he will do and say anything at any time.
Well,
He's a comedian.
we are always hopeful that people will change and act in the national interest.
Jehan,
And
why-
you look
but-
on balance.
In
On balance.
2005 or what, when that draft constitution, 2000 I think, came up.
999.
In 1999. It is, yes, it was inexcusable of the
But Dr. Jehan,
then
now,
opposition leader to lead the burning of the constitution. in
Dr. Jehan,
Parliament.
the realism, the reality of the situation, I find it very, kind of funny to a certain extent when the president comes and says, we will pass this law, we will pass that law. He is the head of the executive. What right does he have to come and speak about the role of the legislature when he's not even a member of parliament?
Well, but as president in this constitution, he is extraordinarily powerful.
Usually,
He can appoint
usually the experience of Sri
He
Lanka.
makes
Shall,
a
with your permission,
throne on the
pose a question to
speech,
Dr. Jadhav.
Throne on the
Sorry?
speech
throne
on the
speech.
throne
speech,
speech.
right.
And he sets out government.
So, but we are in a state of this is an anomaly. This is an anomaly. We've never had a member of parliament who was defeated at the general election, who got into parliament on the national list, and now has risen to the position of the president with
let me
political
ask you,
backing.
Were you one of those people who was saying that we should have a totally non-political person as president? A lot of people are saying that. Then that person, if you had a totally non-political person as president, that person would not have had any mandate.
My question is very simple.
Yeah,
How
so I
can the
think
head of the
holding
executive?
that against the present president, I think it's not of value. It's just, let's forget that.
So
He
no,
was
but
voted by
the
party.
reality, can he really deliver on these promises? Because we've had, presidents and parliament's presidents with 2/3 majority in parliament come and say we will pass this law, and they could have done that because they were the head of the party that was, having a majority in parliament. But this president has one member in parliament, has no majority in parliament, no mandate from the people whatsoever. He comes and makes these promises, and I have an issue in believing
I think
him.
any president, right now we don't have political parties. We have just cully, just gangs of people. So any president is going to have the same problem. They are not going to have majority parliament. They just have to play politics and get things done. So
the
I
president
think
should have called for a presidential election.
Dr. Gamge,
Presidential election.
I think that when you say that we no longer have political parties, we just have gangs, I think that's what we had before as well. It's just that gangs are smaller now.
smaller gangs are smaller.
Gangs are smaller. And gangs are
have been broken up a
confused.
little bit, and they're a little
it is a
confused, a little
really-
dazed and confused. But Dr. Gamge, I want to actually ask you about, we were talking about, legislative priorities and elections. We have legislation that is coming around elections, which organizations like Manjula's IRES, the election monitors basically, Transparency International, CME, the IRES, everyone, have articulated the position that this might be an effort to postpone upcoming local government elections. This is, again, as far as President Wickremesinghe or Wickremesinghe the politician is concerned, this is not a new strategy. He has used this before in 2017 with the Provincial Council Elections Amendment Act, where they turned a 3-page bill into a 75-page piece.
32 pages
Right?
document.
Yes.
Right? So this is
came
not
in as a
something
women's
new.
quota and then came out as a totally different election
Yeah,
system.
with a new mixed member proportional
Totally wrong, yes.
system,
Yeah.
electoral system. And since then we have not had provincial council elections. Provincial council elections are long overdue.
About 4 years.
Local government elections are also long overdue. Wouldn't you argue though that at this point of time for the country, what you do need is, unless President Wickremesinghe himself unilaterally makes the decision to step down and have a presidential election or this thing, he's not going to be removed as president before November of 2024, unless the parties, unless the MPs whip up a 2/3 majority and impeach him. But in the current context, where we have a parliament that is essentially broken, that is setting up committees to improve our rankings in indexes that no longer exist, don't you think that the focus should be on having a parliamentary election as soon as
Absolutely.
possible?
I think so.
By March, April.
March, April, I think one problem is, are we going to have an election under the present system, preferential vote system? Black money is going to win.
But
That's
the issue,
problem. We
issue, however, is that, I mean, you have to work within the system you have, and the issue is that, as I pointed out, even with the Provincial Council Elections Amendment Act, and now with campaign finance, and even with the ICCPR, you have the powerful, the people who are in power, are not above using things that may be for good to achieve their nefarious goals.
Political goals, not political goals, yes.
Well, anti-democratic goals. They say the right democratic buzzwords like campaign finance regulation, like women's quotas for the youth,
Yeah.
anti-corruption.
It looks all good on paper.
It looks good on paper, but the reality, what's happening behind it, is to deny the people the communal right or the community right to franchise, to vote.
I look at this as a whole thing, as a policy analyst, somebody who's pushing for reforms, small step at a time. And, we are never going to get anything, I don't think we're going to get anything better. I think it's going to get worse. So that's why I'm trying to, I think we got the 20th Amendment removed. That's a big win. 21st is not perfect, but 20th Amendment is removed. And we got we have the Constitutional Council formed. But it took time, but it's slow. But I think, politics is the art of possible.
No, but Dr. the point is, why test and try on the shoulders of the public? That shouldn't be the case. At the end of the day, whatever comes into play has to be accepted by the majority of the people. This is not even the minority that we're talking about.
We have representative democracy, we have parliament. You don't go to the people every time to test something. And also, would you think we should have not have the 20th removed? So 21st is not the ideal, but at least we have the Constitutional Council, which will vet the key appointments. The Election Commission was totally appointed by Gotabaya Rajapaksa. The people from the Porto office were, people who were physically in the Porto office are put in there. But now the president cannot do that. The Constitutional Council will be appointed. I think that's a huge step.
So Dr. Gehan, you were speaking about
freedom of expression. We need to go by this small step.
Shalan, can I just pose a question to Manjula? Manjula, now we're talking about freedom of expression, but tell me the difference between freedom of expression and hate speech.
Yeah, the thing is actually then now, again actually it is coming when it comes to the election time also. Actually it is the hate speech, and it is a very huge topic in election time also. Then the main difference is actually that it is the problem of how to use it. Okay, then when the time of freedom of expression, actually you can tell anything, you can talk, and Dr. Jehan also think that he's using more freedom in this time. This lapse of pace. But I think that the main thing is actually when it comes to current situation, actually using the social media platforms. Okay, then the person who are using, actually it applicable to the person who has more power. That is the main thing in this time. But when it comes to the legal perspectives, but it is definitely there's no strong legal provisions to tackle the hate speech in this time.
Manjula, interestingly, now you are the executive director of the Institute of Democratic Reforms and Electoral Studies, a new organization, an NGO that was introduced by you. Now we are all aware that the government is trying to bring in new laws to regulate NGOs in the country as well. Will this have an impact on freedom of expression and association?
Yeah, actually it is the ongoing debate, and it is started unfortunately actually that the again, Dr. Jehan also told that his,
But Dr. Jehan seems to be liking the Ranil Wickremesinghe presidency.
yeah,
Good
non,
start.
A minority, is it?
yeah, not
as
ethnic.
far as panelists are concerned, a minority.
Not ethnic, not ethnic biased leader and more things. But unfortunately, the last time after Jahapalana government came to power, only they brought forward that the NGO bill. Actually, at that time, the minister was Mr. Mano Ganeshan. Actually, there was a huge debate, and that time, what they wanted to tackle this thing, they established NGO secretariat and recruited many people, and this also civil society activism. Actually, you can't frame like that, because it is you should give freedom to them to go freely. But unfortunately, actually, they framed and established a secretariat and do everything. But what they are trying to frame it. That is why actually last week also there was a huge discussion. Then this is a part of that what you mentioned, that the law that trying to take from Singapore. Not only that, actually even now
The social media laws.
social media, I can give a prime example to do that, to prove that. Now that they are using many tactics to postpone elections. The newest tactic is actually that there's ongoing the ongoing case on Sammanture. Actually, Sammanture case said that Kalmune, that there was a gazette notification issued and cancelled parallelly by the Ministry of Provincial Council in 2020. Okay, after 2 years, now they have taken up, and also Legal Attorney General Department also supporting to do that, because that again, actually, that we normally what people are saying, that not ethnic biased leader, he's the not ethnic biased leader. But what we are seeing now, to postpone the election, they brought forward that the case again on the Kalmune case. Actually now, I mean, I strongly believe actually that they are trying to do something bad, because that if taking this out, that the community in between Muslims and Tamils,
basically gerrymandering the electorate along ethnic lines.
That can be happen.
No, I think he's speaking about trying to create conflicts there.
Yeah, by gerrymandering the electorate.
But now, Dr. Sujata said that this is the time to bring in reforms. Now the government is trying to bring in reforms. Example, like the campaign financing bill, but election monitors, like your organization, is saying that this is in the guise of postponing elections. The government is trying to bring in the campaign financing bill. Why is that?
The thing is, actually,
the
know that
government is trying to be progressive, Manjula, but
we were campaigning for that for almost 1 decade time. Okay, actually they had enough time to take this, but unfortunately they are trying to take in hurriedly. That the thing is, actually, it is one of tool to use to postpone the election. That is the thing. But then other thing is that the current situation of
how will this postpone the elections? Just give some context to the people. Now, if this is being brought to Parliament in the next couple of days, how is it going to impact the elections that are going to be held? Just explain about that, Manjula.
Yeah, actually, that there's a provision. I mean, the current campaign finance draft tabled in the Parliament, actually, that it is applicable to, except referendum, other all 4 elections: provincial council, presidential election, general parliamentary election, and local government election. Once they approved in the Parliament, actually there's a special provision that it is applicable to the local government also. That means not political parties in current way. Actually, the all candidates of local government should submit, they must submit their expenditure report within 21 days. Actually, as I heard, according to the Supreme Court determination, that they should submit their expenditure report within 7 days time. Then it is directly applicable to that. Once they approved in the Parliament, it is something that is related to the current ongoing the ongoing debate, as well as it is directly related to the Election Amendment Act 262 ordinance. That is the thing.
They can put a provision saying it doesn't apply to this election. Why not? Just put provision.
They can, but the track record is not good.
But
that's the thing.
but
Actually,
Dr. Gamge, again with
yeah.
2017 as well, there were members in Parliament who tried to include the rider. The reality, though, is that for the sitting government or the ruling party, the intention is not campaign finance regulation.
But I think the campaign finance is important. If you're having a parliamentary election, it's going to be very important. I think we should pass
the doubt is why we are doubt on that. The thing is actually yesterday actually all the political party leaders has decided to postpone it from 1 month. Then suddenly President decided to discuss on tomorrow. Then this is another scenario. The thing is, can in the republic country, can president intervene in that manner for the parliamentary affairs? You can't. Because it's the separation of power.
It's forgotten.
That is the thing.
It's been there so long.
Exactly, Mr. Gajnaik. That's what I kind of tried to allude to before when I asked, how can the president make these promises when he's not even a member of the legislature? But just taking a step back into resolving the ethnic issue, I think, Dr. Gehan, again, back to you. I'm sorry. Jehan, sorry. Dr. Jehan, back to you. There's a question from one of our viewers, and this is how I think Swastika also could pitch into this question. So the viewer asks, why are the Tamil political parties not taking an active step in solving the ethnic issues? Why are they playing politics by breaking up into different sects and subgroups which are proxies to other parties who would want to spew hate?
Well, the Tamil party, the Tamil polity, the Tamil community is as divided among themselves as are the Sinhalese. Sinhalese community has a lot of parties. Tamils also have a lot of parties. Muslims have a lot of parties. And some of the Tamil parties are more mistrustful of the government, of the majority community than others. Fortunately, the largest Tamil political party, the TNA, is more willing to be trustful and more willing to be supportive of any positive government initiative. However, there are other Tamil parties that say that this is once again a deception. President is coming to Jaffna just to canvass for votes, and we must not permit it. And so they came and protested, and there was substantial support from the Tamil people, substantial enough that the police went and water cannoned them. But the majority, the largest party, the TNA, has said that they are prepared to support whatever positive thing comes out of the government. Because I think that's the correct attitude, though it's not a popular attitude. Again, the TNA leadership also is being criticized for being deceived by the government.
Dr. Jahan said you're from the privileged club, but you said you're from the privileged club, remember? But now all these things are happening, water cannons are being used. How come?
Yes, I mean, I said I'm not being subjected to the water cannon.
Also, but that's not fair. You're representing the National Peace Council of Sri Lanka, which is one of the predominantly organizations that were working for the betterment of the Tamil-speaking population in Sri Lanka. Now, recently, Tamil-speaking population from Jaffna district was water cannoned by the police. Now you're saying freedom of expression is there.
No, but my last point when you intervened, you intervened before I made my last point, but then I made my last point, which I said that that negative aspect of today is the government suppression of the protest movement. And it is suppressing anyone.
This is not the protest movement that I'm talking about that was held last year. I'm talking about the protest that was held a couple of days ago.
Yes, that's part of the protest. That was part of the protest. Any political group that challenges the government's political power and political agenda is liable to be suppressed. So that is not a positive thing, and that needs to be condemned.
Swastika, just feeding off the question that Charlene posed, you spoke about arbitrary arrests, you spoke about the government abuse of the ICCPR. In your personal view, do you see in the imminent election that we are expecting, do you see a viable alternative?
To the ICCPR? Or?
No, to a viable alternative to the government we have in place currently.
I don't see a viable I mean, there has to be an election from what we have seen how the parliament has been working since the Aragallia came.
So the question is basically, will it just be, in your personal view, do you feel like it'll just be a reshuffle? of the faces and the positions that we're currently seeing?
I hope not, because I'm hearing that new people are, going to stand for elections. So I hope it's not a reshuffle. But since we have been talking about elections, also one of the things which I was talking to a friend today morning is that the status quo, the political status quo, has been from post-independence has been very reluctant to give up their power in various structural ways. And if you see 1980s, during JR's government, one of the biggest opposition which that government had at the time were trade unions. So when JR came to power, one of the first things he did was he crushed the trade union movement from the general strike, completely crushed it. I don't think the trade union movement ever recovered from that blow from the state. So what I see is after the 1980s is one of the strongest civil movements we had in this country were the student movement. Till very recently, the student movement has been one of the biggest challenges to the government in terms of protecting free education and so on. And with the Aragalia, and before the Aragalia, the government and the establishment rather has been doing various things to portray the student movement as disruptive. When they go on processions, they are blocking traffic, and these are the very tropes we hear about the student movement. But with the Aragalia, the middle class started understanding the student movement and what they do and so on and so forth. And I think the government saw that, not the government per se, but the establishment, the political establishment saw that as a threat to their political status quo. So we were discussing, why did the government go after Vasanta Mudalige? Why is the government going after the student movement? Why are they portraying the student movement? There has been false ragging cases filed against student leaders, completely going after the student movement. And I think when we speak about elections and we speak about power and we speak about status quo, I think the student movement came out in the Aragalia, they came out as one of the biggest threats to the status quo, to the power. And that is why I think the government is going after the student movement and crushing it, and also going after young people. That is another thing. I mean, last time when I said this, Dr. Jehan was not too happy about it, but Ranil Wickramasinghe is really old. And the parliament, if you look at it, look at the faces, I mean, they're really old. All these legislations they're passing, how many people are going to get affected? They would be dead in like 5-10 years. We will be affected by the Bureau of Rehabilitation. We will be affected by the National Security Act. So you need to put young people in parliament, because then they will be voting for their future.
But I have to say something about, but some of the revolutionary changes have been done by old people. Deng Xiaoping, how old was he? He was a very old man.
But that is not what we see in our parliament. We see members of our parliament.
What I'm saying is, age is, you need.
But
yeah, you can't just say just having young people is going to make change.
I think the problem, maybe the problem is not their age per se, but the fact that they belong to this establishment.
But another thing about
student, which is pretty much the same people who Jehan was referring to, who will not back away from any strategy, from any tool at their disposal if you challenge their power.
And remember, the same students, they were trying to take over the parliament.
No, that's not true.
No,
that's not true. That's not true. That's so not true.
No, they would have gone into the parliament.
Could have is a word.
But Dr. Gamage, how do you know exactly that the students were the ones who were going to...
I mean, the protests, I don't know. I mean, there was
but then I think it's
79, wrong. Some houses were burned. Who was behind that, we don't know. But you can see how it can escalate. And I think
who gained out of the burning of the houses?
We don't know that, actually.
I will tell you who burned.
No, we don't know.
I will tell you who gained out of the burning of the houses.
Who gained out of that?
Is the members of parliament, because every single thing which has passed since then, look at the Bureau of Rehabilitation. What did they talk about? Our houses were burned. So let us pass the Bureau of Rehabilitation.
How many people?
Who gained out of it? It was the members of the parliament.
Losing your house. Losing your house. I mean, that day I remember, very much remember, that's the first day after the burning of the house. I mean, it doesn't matter who it is, when your home is burned. It is, I think that Mr. Sumanthiran want to bring in some routine thing, but the members of parliament wanted a debate on the burning of the houses. And I think that's where I felt Sumanthiran should have backed down and said, given, it's feelings, it's about people. You're sitting with people, 75 of them had their houses burned. Chandran Veerakkode. I mean, Bergama was almost killed. So I think I thought it's insensitive at that time. So I think could have escalated into something really serious.
Dr. Gamage, you need to understand that.
I just want to comment on that.
may have
I
been
just
insensitive.
want to comment on that because we were speaking about privilege, right? In 1983, when Ranil Wickramasinghe was in government, houses were burnt. Where is the justice for all those victims? During Dingana riot,
Absolutely.
houses were burnt. Where is the justice for all those victims? Members of parliament houses were burnt. They're all passing resolutions in parliament to fund their houses. So it's about privilege. We also choose who we want to
What
feel
I'm
sorry
saying is
for.
at that moment, I mean, when you're working in parliament, you have to, sit down as colleagues, and I'm particularly different in that particular incident. 83, you can't just compare with this.
But Dr. Gamage,
Of course you can't compare.
It's quite interesting what Swastika raised now. Now, I remember the incidents in Digana. Actually, certain people I knew were seriously affected by that. And it personally affected me as well, knowing that people who I know are being affected so much. Did you feel the same way back then about their houses and their businesses?
I mean, I
Honestly,
don't know
though.
whether I was there. Of course,
Okay.
yes. Yes,
Okay.
I mean, it was in that moment. Next day, what I was worried about is how it could have escalated into, crowds taking over the parliament. I think the government stepped in at the right time and stopped that. And I think the government the fear of the government is justified.
Dr.
I
Gamage,
think.
you were talking about escalation and this thing, because, I mean, right up to the 9th of May, when all this kicked off, you had what was essentially a very peaceful protest movement. The escalation happened at Temple Tree under the
Absolutely.
auspices of
Yes,
the then
yes.
Prime Minister. This thing, we saw the police response to those attacks as well. And I think the miscalculation that the Prime Minister and this thing is that they failed to comprehend exactly how
Yes.
angry people were, and the aftermath is basically what you got was chaos. It was anarchy. It's difficult to maybe it's difficult to point fingers because it wasn't really a organized rioting or organized, let's say, organized to the scale of, let's say, what happened in Digana or Alukama or this thing, where there is a very specific organization, very specific people who are behind it. What you instead saw was boiling point.
Spontaneous.
Yeah.
It's a spontaneous
There's
combustion.
no manual for doing a protest
at
or
the s-
curtailing a protest.
Right. But-
so where do you draw the line? When
But
they
there
went
is,
into
but
the
there is
Prime
a
Minister's
manual. What I think what Swastika is trying to say is that there is a manual for maintaining your, for protecting your little kutia, let's say. The Bureau of
You don't
Rehabilitation
need a
bill,
manual,
which
it's
is coming,
instinct. Yes.
right? The Bureau of Rehabilitation bill, which was passed, which is a joke. I think was it 23-6 in Parliament. So you can see where the legislative priorities are. They're boycotting Parliament over election expenditure regulation bill. You have 23-6. This is long, like this is legislation that, as far as I see, is going to affect a lot of people for a long time to come. That can be used to stifle freedom of expression. You look at those definitions, it is very poor legislation. The definition is so broad. Like, you could be
just come
sent
up
to the
with
Bureau of
legislation.
Rehabilitation for having any kind of divergent viewpoint. Like, you diverge from the views of the establishment by a degree, a half a degree, and you could find yourself in the Bureau of Rehabilitation.
Some of these legislation, I don't know whether people actually, the cabinet actually reads them.
That less than 40 members of parliament in a house of 225 were present to vote for this. These are not the people that you want making reforms, incremental or not.
I don't know what's the alternative we are going. I mean, right now we've been able to get things done, and I think there should be parliament elections soon. And what I'm really upset about is this local election being turned into a referendum on the parliament. Trying to, what happened in 2018. When the SLP got 43% of the votes, and won the most of the councils. They thought it's a mandate to, take over the government by unconstitutional means. So I think a parliament election is in order, and I'll tell you my ideal situation. All the parties come together, they come into a deal, let's have the parliament election, this year.
No, we don't want deals anymore.
Politics is deals.
I don't know.
But Dr. Gamage, you're coming off now as a bigger optimist than Dr.
Of course,
but we don't need
I'm
these
a
deals,
reformist.
Dr.
I
Gamage.
believe in small steps, and you can see the value of small steps. I mean, the Constitutional Council today, we had a young member, a young woman for the first time in there. The Constitutional Council totally abolished by Gotabaya, and now we have it. I mean, these are gains.
But Dr. Gamage, the point is, we don't want deals anymore. We want things to happen for the betterment of the people. That is what
fine. Deals
the
can happen and they have to come
showed
into the open
last
debate.
year. It showed very clearly
Agreement,
that
let's
people.
say agreement.
Dr. Gamage, now you're saying we need to cherish these small steps, but for the longest time Sri Lanka has been, one step forward, two steps back. It's almost like our budget, always a deficit. So instead of moving forward,
Absolutely,
we're moving backwards. So Dr. Gamage, I'm just trying to relate to your viewpoint and then see why other people should also think in a similar manner and say, no, okay, let's go with this government because they're taking small steps. It's good. But while they're taking small steps on one side, they are taking big steps in the wrong direction on the other side. So how does one justify this?
This president, when did he come? August. I think 1 year is, you need give some person 1 year's time. And I think end of the year, we really need a new parliament. There's no question.
We don't need a presidential election.
We can't have
I
presidential election.
Actually,
the president can step down and call
the
for an election.
proportional representation system, we really have not, we really need the president was put in there because of the proportional representation system, because we can never get a majority parliament. So that was idea. Maybe that's not relevant anymore, but I think we need to go cautiously on that.
Don't you think, Dr. Gamage, anyone who comes to this position does not want to hold elections? Now look at Chandrika Bandaranayakumartunga. At the end of her tenure, she wanted to see whether she could stay for another 1 more year.
But I mean,
Maithripala Sirisena, same format. Mahinda Rajapaksa, same format. D.B. Vijayatunga, same format.
It all depends. But president doesn't have a. Maybe he likes to have his old buddies back in parliament. So,
but that's a wrong notion.
No, what I'm saying
Dr.
is
Gamage,
a president needs a majority in parliament, and if he decides.
Dr. Gamage, what you have to understand is this is a discourse that we have to make sure that the people get the right information. When you say deals, when you say
Agreement
is better. Let's take that out. Scrap that.
Yeah, but Dr. Gamage, that is not what the people are expecting from individuals of your caliber.
No. When
they want to have
party leaders meet.
thoughts.
What I meant is party leaders meet in parliament to come into agreement. And maybe if they can come into agreement that they will have the parliament election, postpone do the reforms for the local government and have the election later in March, and the provincial council elections, and do the electoral reforms 6 months in the election committee. I think, but then still we'll be against the law if we don't have the local election. But maybe I don't know, you can tell us, Savistaka, maybe the Supreme Court will consider, if there is a case, because it's an economic crisis and there are a lot of positive things are being promised, they can put a say, if you don't have these things in place, but the elections will go on.
But that is not the mandate of the court.
No, courts can intervene. What do you think, Swastika?
In terms of elections, I'm not an expert on that topic, but I think generally speaking, I don't think it's a good idea to postpone elections in any way. That is my general opinion. But on the legal aspects of it, I'm not an expert to speak about.
And also, actually, there's a determination delivered in 2016. Also, even it is the government responsibility to hold elections.
The 2000 elections.
What I'm saying is, Dr.
because
Gamage, even in the backdrop of having a Supreme Court determination, what you're basically seeing here, they're using legislation as kuldagari to postpone elections, because you have the judiciary on one hand. The judiciary has already told you.
As I said, the right to vote.
How do you then postpone the election? You go to the place that makes the laws, and then you put in a few pieces of paper.
Actually,
you start the legal process. You then keep it delayed in committee. Maybe add a few more pages. Then you just keep on postponing it. This kind of behavior you have seen. There is a pattern.
But what I'm saying is the right to vote.
Individuals acting in this way over the past
not like
half century.
any other rights. It has a technical component, it has a political component. So it's, you can't, as I say, it's not an individual right that you can go to courts and say, actually people did that. Yes, you can do that. But I think sometimes political considerations have to come in, and if it's for the overall, for the betterment of the country, I think all three.
But who decides that, Dr. Gamage? Who decides whether or not if it's for the betterment of the country?
The Parliament has to first come together, and then of course people will go to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court will have to make the judgment.
Dr. Gamage, I said that this has been happening for half a century, where they use the place that laws are supposed to be made, which is supposed to be the house of the people, to undermine the people's rights and the people's franchise. This is what happened in 78 with the Constitution as well. The Constitution was then used later. The powers that came, the current president's uncle, President J.R. Jayawardena, used his powers to call for a referendum to postpone parliamentary elections. And you can see the kind of chaos that comes about when you have people in power, or you've extended through deal making and agreement making, you've extended the term of people who have no mandate. And it seems that President Wickremesinghe right now is incapable of understanding the same thing that his uncle was incapable of understanding.
I think it'll be his undoing if
have leaders who have no mandate.
It'll be his undoing. But I think he wants to establish his legacy, and I think he's really interested in reform.
No, Dr. Gamage, it's not about deals, it's not about agreements, it's not about legacy. We don't want this.
No, we have to look at it later, and I think there's some trust. I feel that he is for reforms. He has always been for reform.
Just to touch on reform,
but look at the UNP for an example.
On balance.
No, look at the UNP for an example. Let's talk about reforms. Let's look at the UNP for an example, Dr. Sujata. What happened? 2010, the UNP lost heavily at the presidential election. Then the UNP decided to appoint a leadership council. Tell me the outcome of this leadership council. Tell me the outcome of the restructuring of the UNP.
But I'm looking at when he's in power.
Now,
I think the 2001 to 2004 period, I was there. And there were so many things that we achieved during that period. But then Madam Chandrika, she dissolved parliament. And look what happened in 2005 to 2010. 2008, we had this constitutional coup.
2018.
Everything was, 2018. Everything was put into disarray.
Doctor, what was the affiliation with the then government between 2001 and 2004?
I was at the Tertiary and Vocational Education Commission. I was Director General.
I think Swastika wanted to add something.
I just wanted to touch on reform because in 1979, under the JR's government, the Prevention of Terrorism Act was passed. Then in 2015,
Temporary Provisions Act.
Temporary provisions. Yes, temporary provisions which has remained to date. Then in 2015, when Ranil came to power, the Counter-Terrorism Act was brought, and then civil society and trade unions and student movements have to go on a huge protest and uphill task to stop that. So that got withdrawn because of the election. And then now, in reform, now Ranil Wickremesinghe is about to bring the National Security Act, which it's kind of going to be like the new phase of the Prevention of Terrorism Act. So yes, he has been bringing about reform, but reform to suit a certain agenda. For instance, the Bureau of Rehabilitation. Yes, it is reform because everyone wants rehabilitation. But what does the act actually say? It's rehabilitating people who are dissidents to the government's position. So yes, reforms are coming, but
was that removed, Swastika?
It's
only drug addicts now, right?
The bill which was passed basically says the Bureau of Rehabilitation applies to drug-dependent persons and other persons as provided for by law.
As provided for by law. So terrorists, PTA, detainees.
So they have to bring new legislation to provide. But the Bureau of Rehabilitation is set up, and all of its regressive provisions are there. It's a matter of parliament.
They can bring in additional provisions to refer whoever. Mr. Gajanayaka, I'd like to just pose this question to you now. The biggest, there are certain ideas that were floated as to why we can't have an election. First, they said there's a decision in Parliament, and there was a letter sent, a whole fiasco there. Nothing has happened. The Secretary to the Ministry of Internal Affairs is still in place, and the Prime Minister is saying that they didn't take a decision like that at the Cabinet. But I was watching an interview where the Secretary to the Ministry of Finance comes out and says, look here, we don't have money. we don't have money, we don't have money. He phrased that in various different ways and gave various statistics. But is this true?
I don't think actually, because yes, it is true. I mean, it is a part of postponing the election, because before I came to this discussion, actually I just checked the appropriation bill approved for the 2023. Actually, they have allocated over 1.5 billion rupees for the two officers, presidential and prime ministerial office. Then have you seen or heard anything related to they are going to cut that cost, actually both the president's and prime minister's office? No. And also actually that until last week actually they spent money and did everything, and also actually for the Sri Lankan Airlines and the other organizations, actually they spending money, billions for the only to give the bonuses. Then I don't think that actually they are telling truth. Actually, I mean, they have money. And other thing is, we have never seen that any government actually in this our electoral history, actually it is their duty to provide money for the elections. I reiterate that, emphasize, because we are living in a republic. Okay?
Mr. Gajanayaka, now Sri Lanka has gone down in history for a lot of bad things. Recently we went down as the country to be defeated at a ODI above 300 runs for the first time. But besides that, will Sri Lanka also go down in history as the country that couldn't hold an election, the first country in the world that couldn't hold an election because they didn't have money?
It won't hold water. They can't bring that argument.
I mean,
that's a very big argument.
Even let's say that actually that considering the other factors, I mean the international arena, I mean the international community, actually, if we don't have money, even we can pledge, I mean we can give a call and I mean ask the international community support, because there are many countries have taken money to conduct elections, but actually we have never experienced that, because actually that if there is a political will, they can. Because let me to tell couple of things, that the president actually went to northern part and pledged to fully implement the 13th amendment suddenly. Okay, then the second thing is actually he just promises to give 10 kilos of rice to more
2
than
2 million families.
Yes. Then that is also money. Okay. Then actually there's a willingness and a political willingness. Actually, they can do it. I don't think that default that
But isn't that coming because the 10 kilograms of rice at least? Isn't that coming as a part of the safety net program that has been introduced or articulated by the IMF? I was saying it's coming in part. I was saying that is coming because of the election.
But it's ad hoc.
Definitely, actually, I mean, you may remember that even during the 2014 UA Provincial Council, also actually they distributed 2,500 each. Actually, Pafferal went to court challenging that decision. That time also, it also a crucial decision. I mean that the same scenario is used in this time also, but it may be a green light to hold elections, I mean.
But Dr. Gajanayaka, Mr. Gajanayaka, you're saying now, according to the Constitution, I believe 104 GG, Article 104 GG, any public official, public office holder who interrupts an election process can be prosecuted in a court of law. So even the Elections Commission went out and put a statement saying, look here, we're trying to hold a free and fair election. This is a plea to all political parties. Do not stifle the election. He referred to very specific allegations, saying that ministers have made false statements, certain media outlets have made false claims regarding a meeting with the IGP. So it's come to that point. So as the Elections Commission, if the Elections Commission feel that, look here, the pressure is too much, there is too much of political parties trying to stifle this election, can they act on that?
No, actually, additional to the Constitution, even that the current election is implementing using the Election Amendment Ordinance 262 ordinance. Actually, accordingly, according to that ordinance, that 76A article that also actually clearly saying that the whole authority vested with the election commission, no anyone can make any decision related to the postponing election or sending that kind of letters. But we know that all the election monitoring mission went to election commission and pledged and requested to take stern action against that secretary to the Ministry of Public Administration. But unfortunately, yes, he went there and apologized. But after that, I heard that the chairman of the election commission said that we are not going to take any other action since he has apologized. Not only him actually, that Mr. Fernando, also the secretary to the cabinet.
What's the reason he apologized and said what?
It is actually maybe the misunderstanding and also not directed by the cabinet. It is his fault. And also it was
my bad.
And I think
Manjula, an important point to highlight is that countries or governments don't, when they go broke, they don't go broke the same way that individuals or companies do. Yes. Argentina has defaulted multiple times over, and they've had multiple elections in the last few years. So I think it's a moot point, this the whole conversation around not having elections. But Dr. Jan, given that you and Dr. Gamage, who are sort of, I think, fair to say that you've articulated the position that you think of Mr. Wickremesinghe as a reform-minded politician, that he has some commitment towards reform. But when the reason that you look back at his history is that even when he had a mandate for reforms, when President Sirisena was elected in January of 2015, you had the 19th Amendment was passed. Part of that program, articulated in their manifesto, which the UNP of Ranil Wickremesinghe backed as well, was also electoral reforms through the proposed 20th Amendment at that time. Progress was being made around the electoral system itself, to introduce a mixed member proportional system, to have the boundaries redrawn through by way of constitutional amendment. There was discussion around campaign finance, a lot of things that they're talking about now. What happened then was they had Parliament dissolved and called for elections. Not because they couldn't find agreement on the 20th Amendment.
No, that was because of that. I was there. Yeah.
It was to stop the COPE report from coming out.
COPE report.
It was to stop Diogunasekare's COPE report on the bond scam from coming out. The 20th Amendment, the reforms, those are secondary considerations.
No.
Because
the 20th Amendment
as you said,
is very
politics is
difficult
art
one.
of the possible and art of the deal. And the deal was to stop the COPE report from coming out.
But Nadine, you need to pose a question without putting across a point, because that's why we have the four panelists today on the show to get their thoughts on the subject. So, Dr. Jahan, interestingly, how can international processes like the Human Rights Council or the Universal Periodic Review processes be used to strengthen protection of the freedom of expression in Sri Lanka?
But first, I'd like to just address Nadim's point, because it's interesting. Everyone is probably interested to know about the president and his reform-mindedness. President is reform-minded in certain areas, but he is also a politician who wants power. So these are the two things that are in conflict. And I'm hopeful that with regard to the ethnic issue, that he will do what no one else has succeeded in doing. That's a hope of mine. Because if actually Sri Lanka turns the corner on this, it will be of immense benefit to us. Well, what Shamir asked about with the international community, with Geneva, with the Tamil diaspora.
And for us.
Yeah, and for us too. I mean, we are a country that, I often say this, at independence in 1948, after 150 years of colonial rule and exploitation by the British colonials, we were nevertheless one of the best of countries in Asia. We say second to Japan. After we got independence, so that means we are a very prosperous country, resource rich, people rich. But after we got independence, we are now right at the bottom. And why? Because we are divided people. Our family is divided. Ethnically, religiously, politically, we are all divided. So if we can get over this hump, this one big hump that we have not been able to get over, and as I said, the father of our nation, so-called father, D.S. Senanayake, one of the first things he did, disenfranchise a section of our people. A mistake that then we corrected, we have tried to correct, but still if you go to those parts of the country, you still see them living many of them living in the lime rooms they lived in 100 years ago. So this is the issue that if we must get over. Now, President is promising it, the TNA is willing to support it, and I think that the people are also ready for it. People, the general population, I mean, I find that at all levels, people are ready now to think of new ways. Even former President Mahinda Rajapaksa now went to see the TNA leader, Sambandhan. It's a good thing. I mean, maybe he sees that his own son's future lies in the direction of a Sri Lanka that is healed and not promoting nationalism of one group against the other. So, but against that is the political instinct, where the desire to stay in power sometimes overrides everything else.
Dr. Jehan, when you say his son's future, do you mean his son's future as a Sri Lankan or his son's future as a politician?
Politician.
Okay.
Dr. Jehan, you just expressed a sentiment that the people were ready. But how would you address the problem of our extremely low political literacy? The fact that votes are so easily bought and manipulated. So really, I mean, how much of a difference will this election make?
See, our people are actually I think are politically literate also. They're literate, but maybe they get...
You just give them a 5,000 rupee note and you can buy a vote.
They trust their political leaders, and nationalism has been very powerful. Because if you go into our history, you can see that these divides are not new ones. They were there 100 years ago. During the British time, the British themselves noted this, and that was one of the reasons they sort of refrained from giving us self-rule at an earlier point. So they thought that otherwise we were capable of self-rule, but because we were so divided ethnically.
Would you also say there is an unhealthy sort of party allegiance, like an attachment, party loyalty basically?
I think that has been there, but now it's changed. Now I think people are more willing to vote on, change their allegiances and vote in a new way.
Can I add something to what Jehan was saying? I mean, it's not that people are ready. I think this parliament, you might call it a den of thieves, but I think this parliament has a self-interest in solving the national question, I think. I think this, another parliament may not be as opportune. I think this is, we need to make best use of this parliament. The port tour is, with Mr. Ranil Wickremesinghe. So, they both have an interest in keeping each other. And I think solving the national question, maybe this parliament is, we might be able to get it through this one.
Do you feel that this parliament is still reflective of the will of the Sri Lankan people? It's
not, but I think, we're talking about 6 months.
But if reforms that are passed without
I think this parliament,
without the public
we need a
will,
parliamentary
without the
election.
people's,
We need a parliamentary
any reforms
election.
that are passed without the mandate of the people, without public buy-in, don't you think that those are doomed to fail? Because don't forget, even even in terms of economic reforms, let's say IMF, after the 2018 local government election, it was evident that the Sirisena Wickremesinghe government had lost its mandate, because they kind of set up the ballot paper for the local government elections as a referendum of the political parties to see which one the people preferred. And the people voted resoundingly, because people weren't really going around checking who the candidate for their ward was. People weren't looking at those lists outside. It was a referendum of the political party. So then you have, what you have now is, what you then realize is that one of the first things that Gotabaya Rajapaksa did as he became president was he withdrew from the IMF Extended Fund Facility, which was an economic reform brought in by a government that no longer had the mandate or the will of the people to govern. So, sure, maybe working with the TNA, President Ranil Wickremesinghe might achieve full implementation of the 13th Amendment. Maybe he'll resolve the national question by the time his term ends in November of 2024. But when the next election is held, does that mean that we're going to have those reforms in place only until maybe around 2025? Because whoever it is that's going to campaign against him, you can be guaranteed, as you said, because of nationalism, that they will be running on that campaign.
It is very important.
The reforms will last for a very short time.
My belief is that, see, there are some things where the divisions are very great, where there is need for great leadership. Countries like Singapore were also divided on ethnic lines. They had the Chinese, the Malays, the Tamil, the Indians, but they had a great leader. South Africa, terribly divided, but great leadership. I think we have not had that leadership, and whether Mr. Wickremesinghe will be that leader, I don't know. I'm hopeful.
But
he
both
will be. And then you
Mr.
must show-
Mandela and Mr. Lee Kuan Yew had the backing of their polity, of their people. They had Mr. Lee Kuan Yew to an extent. Afterwards, he went authoritarian.
It's
but
a moral
Mr.
issue.
Mandela,
I think it's-
definitely, he had the
it's a moral issue.
And it's important that the
correct thing to
government
do.
leadership shows that the system works. They must show the people that their fears are not realized. And then the people will follow. I think there are some issues in which great leadership is needed. And that leadership, but of course the leader has to be also trusted by the people. And that is the difficulty. And that's why Mr. Mahinda Rajapaksa might have had a better chance of solving the problem, especially after the war, if he had not gone on his journey of nationalism. He continued on that journey, unfortunately. But I'm hopeful that President Wickremesinghe now will show that leadership. And as Sujata said, this parliament, in a way, they are leaderless now. In a way, they are leaderless. They are frightened, or they are also frightened. And
Frightened about what?
They're frightened of the people. They're frightened to go. They're frightened to go to the people. And we also have an opposition, a very responsible opposition. That is the strength we have. The opposition.
Which side are you betting?
I'm
Side of peace.
I'm not.
I'm trying to figure it out for the last 1.5 hours. I'm trying to figure it out. Where is Dr. Jehan standing in the equation now?
No, we don't. We want to solve the problem. We are civil society. Civil society does not care whether it's UNP or SJB or Port who are in power. We want the right things done. We are not aiming to get into power. So,
Sorry,
Ethnic issue is
Dr.
a moral
Gamini,
issue.
you were speaking that you were saying that the political, it's in the interest of the current parliament that
I
they
would
solve
think, yeah.
that they solve this national issue. But when you speak about solving an issue, now take for example the 19th Amendment to the Constitution. When the 19th Amendment was brought, they said, okay, no dual citizens in Parliament or for the presidency. We thought, okay, right, yeah, that issue is solved.
I don't agree with
Then they said, there's more oversight in Parliament because there's a Constitutional Council, no more ad hoc appointments, independent commissions, no one can interfere with the police, no one can interfere with the judiciary. We thought, yeah, okay, that problem is solved. But then it came back again. So on this national issue, can we just, say, maybe let's hope that the current president solves this national issue and then sit back and be like, okay, national issue done, move on to the next issue. Isn't it just going to come back again?
It would, but I mean, this parliament has enough of, mixture of people, enough of parties. I think they'll have a hard time going back on, but they have gone back on the.
But Dr. Gamini, don't you think it's more important for the leaders that we elect to have genuine intent to solve the national issue instead of having
moral
this
issue? It's a moral imperative. We need to solve the ethnic issue, and if this parliament can do it, let's go for it. I mean, next parliament, if they change it, let's address that. But right now, I think everything we are held back. We can get our macroeconomics in order.
Swastika, how optimistic are you? How optimistic are you?
I was
We are
just
two
listening
optimists onto your right. Tell me how optimistic
No,
are
I
you?
was just listening to the conversation, and if I'm not mistaken, correct me if I'm wrong, the whole I'm going to solve the national issue came about during the budget debate, where the Prime Minister looked at the opposition, the Tamil members, and said, let's solve the national question or something. And so it was not really, you kept on saying it was a moral issue, but morally it was like, I'm a Tamil person who has been through racism and all of that, and I'm sitting and watching there, and the president of the country throws the national question like a carrot, as if it would be solved in like 1 or 2 days. So I think that is telling off whether that I draw my political conclusion from that. It's telling off whether he would actually go through with this national question, because national question is not about implementing the 13th Amendment, because 13th Amendment is not only for the North and the East, it's also for the rest of the country.
Absolutely.
National question is also about looking into the political prisoners issue. There are 30 Tamil political prisoners still in detention. Why haven't you released them? It's also a question about the disappearances. Mothers are still on the streets looking for answers. Why haven't you come up with answers? It's also about the land question. Lands are still being taken by the military, by the archaeological department in the north. It's about the language issues. To date, I get notices from the government only in Sinhala. I mean, how many times I go and sit at the National Labour Advisory Council, I get I get publications only in Sinhala. I mean, how many? I mean, it's not a matter of charity; it's a matter of right. So, and when we ask for Tamil translation, what do they say? Oh, we are in a crisis. We don't have resources. So you said that it was a moral issue. For me, it's a political issue to come up with a solution. And this parliament has not given a single indication. I mean, it was this parliament who called Mr. Sanakin a terrorist in parliament because it's a Tamil. So I don't see
all worse things. Yeah.
Dr. Jehan, just to sort of highlight, underscore what Swastika is saying. I mean, you do have a situation where, like, you say that, okay, if this parliament and this president can solve this parliament, this president, a lot of politicians who are there right now are also the ones who are responsible for, let's say, the arresting and the persecution of Anaf Jazim. Who has been arrested under the PTA, whose case is still ongoing, mind you. He's not been acquitted, he's just out on bail, because he had written poetry in a style of poetry that was anti-terrorist or anti-violence, but the people who arrested him basically didn't know the language because it was written in Tamil. You also have, for example, the case, I think, it will come into the national conversation the next time he wins the State Literary Award in Tamil as well, but the case of Mr. Aruran, Sivalingam Aruran, who has won the State Literary Award, who is a PTA detainee. He's been there for 13 years now in prison. And this is a pretty high profile case because he was arrested in 2009 or 6 on suspicion of involvement of the Pitala Junction bombing of then Defence Secretary Gotabaya Rajapaksa's vehicle. So, for 13 years, the law enforcement authorities in this country have been unable to establish whether this person was involved or not. Have been unable to persecute him. So for 13 years, he's been living in prison. He started writing. He keeps winning the State Literary Award in Tamil. And every time he is paraded out by the prison officials at the BMICH for the award ceremony, it's the only time that the country is talking about this man's situation. He's forgotten about a week later. And these are the people that you are expecting, that you have faith in to solve are these the people that you have faith in to solve the problem that you're talking about, the national problem? Because these are the people that are responsible for putting that man in that position.
30 people, only 30 people in prison. How much political effort does it take to get them out? That's all we're saying.
Let's start there.
I think we need to make a concerted effort.
Talk to the president.
I think they should, that president has to show the leadership and
Dr. Jehan, you don't have to go
and deal with the security forces, the security establishment, who may be having their own reasons for keeping them, maybe to say that they didn't make a mistake in the first place, or there are legal procedures that have to be gone through, but then there's also the power of the presidential pardon. There are extraordinary.
But Dr. Dan, do you honestly believe that the security establishment and the political establishment are two separate entities? Aren't they one and the same?
And
that feed each other and protect each other?
Bloated defense budget.
They feed each other and protect each other.
But bloated defense budget, that is right. Yeah, because perhaps the president's, as you said, he has only one seat in Parliament.
I'm pretty sure, Dr. Jehan, when you're leaving this studio today, you're going to leave as a changed man.
So I think he's consistent.
Dr. Jehan, you don't have to look any further. If you want your National Peace Council to address a problem, look to your immediate left. That's Swastika. If you impress her, I think the National Peace Council job would be much more easier because she's representing the minority community in Sri Lanka. Which
I think
it's very simple.
I think the ICCPR, PTA and the Section 120 Penal Code, these are things we should be fighting for to remove those. We had a Katikawa, we had discussion on that National Movement for Social Justice, and what I heard, I'm not an expert, but I heard is actually these are not necessary. These issues can be dealt with under the ordinary penal code. And this penal code, this section is not necessarily the penal code. So I think we more than individuals, I think we are right now we are saying Vasantamudan gave us, but we need to just these three. Shehan Malak Gamge was taken in for talking about the PASCU, that he was said there's a conspiracy behind it, and he was taken in under Section 120. So I think we need to focus not on more than individuals. These three acts. We need to get
the PTA had an adverse impact on the freedom of expression in Sri Lanka?
I mean, it is one of the laws that has impacted on the freedom of expression, and the other with the ICCPR.
ICCPR.
That is a very scary one.
Scary
The
one.
ICCPR, where a good law has been used for bad purposes. PTA certainly. I mean, PTA is a very scary law because it means that you can be taken in even without a charge and then just incarcerated indefinitely, basically.
So let's discuss now the way forward. Now we're talking about the negatives, we're looking at constructive engagement, all this has to be done. Well and good. But what's the way forward? Now we are in a very critical juncture. We are talking about election in the next few months if the government decides to hold an election. How critical is it for the people to understand the way forward for Sri Lanka? Manjula?
Yeah, I think actually that I assume that the very first thing that the government should do is that through the parliament and as well as the other fronts, actually they should allow to do the elections. Okay, that the very first time actually the local government elections, they are taking many tactics to postpone the election, but actually the what we are seeing, that let me to say the very critical thing here, that the main thing is that actually that the Attorney General already informed officially to the Election Commission there are 2 ongoing cases, Supreme Court cases actually on election, postponing the elections, but Attorney General already officially informed to the Election Commission that they are not appearing for Election Commission. Now they have to find private lawyers using their own money. This is a very dangerous situation. When actually after 21st amendment, actually once the Constitutional Council established, actually if they are appointing another commission members to the Election Commission, if they are thinking actually that if the same scenario is happening, what will happen actually if they are thinking not to pay their personal money for Attorney General in next time, actually they will be silent, the things will go the same line. That's the main thing. Then the first thing is government should allow to do the election without doing anything or without postponing. Okay, it is very first thing that the perspective of the people. We know that that you made a question that you asked the question regarding the political literacy as well as the election literacy. I mean that in Sri Lankan, actually, that as Sri Lankan we do have election literacy. We know how to put the cross and everything. But unfortunately, actually, when it comes to the political literacy, we have a problem. We have a serious problem with that. Then this, as Shamir, you know that the last time also I made this comment, actually at least now we are in a critical juncture. People can make a decision in at least in this time. That's the way forward, actually. Conduct the election first, then do other economic and other fronts. Actually, the IMF and other international community will support if we have genuine elections, if we can conduct genuine elections.
Dr. Sujata, what are your thoughts?
I think I'm really disappointed at the way this government is behaving like a bunch of juveniles when it comes to the election. They're coming up with all kinds of silly excuses. When they could have 6 months ago, you know, National Movement for Social Justice, we came up with this idea things to do without postponing the election. This they could not have, you know, campaign finance reform, disclosure of assets, you know, getting more women's representation increased to 25. The current we have only 10% for contesting in wards. You know, a lot of things they could have done, and they could have come out and be honest with people, and they could have and argued for why not have postponed these elections and have them all together on have an election calendar. They could have made a case, but right now they are behaving like a bunch of juveniles coming with no money. That's not true. They're saying the secretary sent a letter to the Election Commission, which is ridiculous. They can't do that. It's an independent commission. So I think maybe it's now too late. I know we are going to have local councils with 8,000 plus councillors who have no idea what to do. You know, we should have established the ward committees. You know, when you set up this election system, the central government doesn't care. They want these people elected. Now they have foot soldiers. That's all they care. But to make our ward representative work, we need ward committees. That needs to be legislated. There need to be people participation in the ward committees. There's so much to do. And the government could have made a good argument. We gave them all the arguments to have the parliamentary select committee, do the electoral reforms, and then go for elections. But right now they're just playing. And so sad to see. We'll have an election. It's not going to do any good for the country or for the local council, particularly the local councils. They're
So
going
you're
to be a
saying
mess.
not hold elections now?
I think it's too late now. I mean, there's no trust. Every time the government moves, people say, oh, they're trying to delay the election, and that's what they've been doing. They've been behaving like a bunch of juveniles. They have not been behaving like adults. So sadly, I think we are going to have an election.
When you say the government is acting like a bunch of juveniles, does that include President Ranil Wickremesinghe Singh as well?
No, not President Ranil. Actually, he's one adult in the room, but one adult can't do anything.
Yeah,
Very subjective, but yes, okay.
I might have three thoughts for the way forward. And the first is, of course, the solution of the ethnic conflict. I think this is the best time. We have a president, a leader who is non-racist, who has always stood for the rights of the ethnic minority, maybe not been opposed to them, not been hostile to them, as many of our leaders have been. And we have an opposition, as I said, that is responsible opposition. I believe the opposition will cooperate. So this is the best time for that. The second thing would be strengthening the independent institutions. We just saw an example of how an institution can make a big change. The Supreme Court verdict, a first step in regard to the Easter Sunday case. Now, there are other cases before the Supreme Court. I hope the Supreme Court has the strength and the people's support to go into those cases. Economic accountability, economic crimes for what has happened. We need to strengthen the institutions so that the president cannot summon the election commission to his office and try to intimidate them. We need that. And because that was the system that the British gave us. It was a very good system, the system of permanent secretaries, where the secretary of the civil service could not be just shifted around at the whim of the politician. But in 72, 97, that was a big mistake we made. We made two big mistakes. 1948, disenfranchising our state Indian Tamils. Second big mistake, 72, the 72 Constitution, giving the elected politician the right, a higher position than the judiciary and the public service.
Politicized.
Yeah, politicized. That brought politicization. We must strengthen the system of checks and balances. That's the second thing. Third, we must reach out to the international community. We must apologize to Japan, for instance, for cancelling the light rail, the LRT project, the light rail project. Such a huge project could have made such a difference to our country. Look at and see what's happening in Dhaka. Bangladesh accepted, is doing that, but we rejected it. We must try and get it back from the Japanese. Same way, I believe we must try and get the MCC, what the Americans tried to offer us, which we suspected them. Of course, if we have to draw a distinction between an economic project and sort of national security issues, and I think we can do it. If we do those things, I think we can bring a lot of resources into our country, and if we solve the ethnic problem, there'll be a lot of international goodwill.
Dr. Jehan,
investors also might be willing to come in.
Dr. Jehan, what is the role of institutions such as the Human Rights Commission in Sri Lanka protecting freedom of expression? Why should such commissions be independent?
I think they should be independent because they have a monitoring role. They must call out the government when the executive arm is breaking the law. They should be able to bring that issue up, and maybe they should be given more powers to penalize people, which at the moment the Human Rights Commission does not have the power. They have to refer the cases to the courts. But if the courts are independent, the courts can take action.
President threatened them also, no, in the parliament.
As Human Rights Commission has been very, I think the recent Human Rights have been very...
You are very silent when Manjula says the President has threatened the Human Rights Commission. You duck that question.
No, because the Human Rights Commission
you are better than the Sri Lankan batsman.
No, they stood up for during the Aragalaya protest, they stood up for the rights of the protesters, the Human Rights Commission.
They did.
They did.
Yes, Swastika, way forward.
So on the national question, I don't have a solution to the national question. It's a long debate. But few of the things which the president can do, which is in his power, is one is the release of the political prisoners, which is there are only around 30. The other is to repeal the PTA and not replace it with the National Security Act, because victims of the PTA, including the Tamils and the Muslims, have been asking for the repeal of the PTA, but no one has asked for it to be replaced. But that's what the government is doing. And of course, the disaster in waiting, the Bureau of Rehabilitation, which was passed today, I think it has to be withdrawn. It has to be repealed now because it has passed as a law. So those three things which can be done as a first step to even starting to discuss this national question. Of course, the elephant in the room is the executive presidency, which has since its inception has been eroding democracy. So every president has been promising the abolition of executive presidency. People have come in numbers and asked Gota to go home, and then they asked Ranil to go home, which means basically they don't want a president. But here we have a president. So the abolition of the executive presidency would be a sign towards democracy. And the release of Vasanta Mudalige, because Vasanta has become as a case for what the establishment is doing against young leaders. So releasing Vasanta Mudalige and seizing to stop the targeting of students would be a positive sign from the older leadership towards the younger generation who came during the Aragali and said we want system change. So that would be something that is definitely something which is completely in the president's control to do, because the Attorney General's department simply acts on the instructions of the executive.
So are you saying that there is no system change now in Sri Lanka?
Not at all. We replaced one president with another president. The system continues to roll. The only thing which happened was we removed one figure out of the system. Ranil Wickremesinghe came to power. On the very same day he took oaths, he crushed the Aragale using the military. You remember July 22nd. So the system continues to roll. He used the PTA just like every other executive president has done. He used the emergency power just like every other executive presidency has done. And the only thing which Parliament was worried about during the Aragalia was that their houses were burning. So literally violence is the only thing which our elected representatives are worried about.
The only elephant in the room, the president is representing the symbol of the elephant as well. If you didn't know, Swastika. Dr. you wanted to add something to what Swastika said? Or?
Actually, this presidency is different. Not having the 20th makes a big difference. So this presidency is a little bit better than because of the legislative changes. The 20th, repealing the 20th was a big step in my opinion.
Let's choose to disagree, because I think the actual system change comes when the executive presidential system is abolished, because the presidential system is tied to so many other things. Militarization, land issues, ethnic tension, it's tied to so many things. So if you want system change,
checks and balances, the presidency with checks and balances is what we might be going for. I think it might be.
I hope not. I hope we see the last of the executive presidential system sometime soon.
Well, thank you very much, gentlemen and the two ladies, for joining us this evening on Face the Nation. Thank you very much, Manjula Kajanayaka, Executive Director of the Institute of Democratic Reforms and Electoral Studies, for joining us this evening on Face the Nation. Critical juncture in the Sri Lankan history as far as this year is concerned. So do you think elections will be held, Manjula?
Yes, definitely. Now, yes, that actually that the path is clear now. Road is clear, because tomorrow also a crucial day, but I don't think that they can do it what they are expecting. Now actually the road is clear. Election will be held maybe the last week of February or the first week of March.
Right. Dr. Sujata Gamange, thank you very much for joining us this evening on Face the Nation. Advisor
here as independent policy
advisor to the Advocata Institute. Thank you very much, Dr. Sujata, for joining us this evening on Face the Nation. As you say, reforms are needed. Whether reforms should be carried out now is the big question mark, but let's wait and see how things are going to pan out as far as this year is concerned. And thank you very much, Dr. Jehan Pereira, Executive Director of the National Peace Council of Sri Lanka, the eternal optimist and the very hopeful individual in the room as far as the current presidency is concerned. Let's hope and pray that things would turn out to be for the better for Sri Lanka.
Optimistic for Sri Lanka.
And let's be optimistic for Sri Lanka.
That's why we are living here.
That's why you returned from the US in 1990 and joined Swarvodaya movement, Dr. Jehan. So that optimism still remains since 1990 to 2022. And nothing has concretely happened with regard to the ethnic conflict in Sri Lanka, isn't it?
No, I think things are better today.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jehan Pereira, for joining us this evening on the show. Swastika Lingam, the President of the Commercial and Industrial Workers Union. Thank you very much, Swastika, for joining us this evening on the show and expressing your views in terms of what needs to be done in the country. Thank you very much, Shania, Attorney at Law, Sharon Benedict, and Nadeem for joining us this evening on Face the Nation. I leave you tonight, as I always do, with a quote. If freedom of speech is taken away, then dumb and silent we may be led like sheep to the slaughter. Take care and good night.